The sky changed color so quickly I didn't think it was real. We'd been trudging through the forest for hours, sweating under the sun, when everything went dark. Not regular storm dark, but this weird green-black that made my skin crawl. "That doesn't look good," Dom said, stopping to check his phone's weather app. His face tightened. "No signal out here." Rafi paused beside us, looking up. "We need to find cover right now." I reached for my rain jacket. "How far to the next shelter point?" "Too far," Dom said, tucking his phone away. "Like 8 kilometers at least." The first drops hit hard, not like rain, but like small rocks. Within seconds, they grew bigger. Round chunks of ice smacked against leaves and bounced off the ground around us. "Hail!" I yelled, pulling my pack over my head. We ran toward a cluster of pines, but the ice balls came faster, growing to the size of golf balls, smashing through leaves and cracking against rocks. The noise was so loud we had to shout to hear each other. Dom pressed his back against the biggest pine, his jacket already soaked. "This is crazy." The forecast said clear all day. Rafi stood next to me, flinching when ice hit his shoulder. "Our tents won't handle this." He was right. Our backpacking tents were made for rain and wind, not for getting bombarded from the sky. The temperature dropped fast, too. I could see our breath now, even though we'd been sweating just minutes ago. "We need better shelter," I said, looking around through gaps in the branches. That's when I spotted it. Stone walls rising through the trees maybe 300 meters away, and what looked like a tower. I pointed. "There's a building over there." Dom narrowed his eyes where I pointed. "You sure?" "Yeah, stone walls, a tower, some kind of big old building." "Better than getting our heads cracked open out here," Rafi said, adjusting his pack. "Let's go." We made a run for it, hunched over with our packs held above our heads. The hail pounded our shoulders and backs, each hit a sharp jolt of pain. The ground had turned slippery with ice and rain, and I nearly fell twice as we ran. As we got closer, I saw the building more clearly, a huge chateau, way bigger than I first thought. Its walls were crumbling in spots, covered in dead vines clinging to stone. Half of the east tower had fallen into a pile of rubble. Every window was just an empty black hole facing out to the storm. A rusted iron fence went around the property, but the gate hung open, on broken hinges. We rushed through without stopping, the hail still pounding down behind us. The front door was massive, thick oak with iron bands across it standing slightly open. I pushed it wider, and the hinges made this awful groaning sound as we stumbled inside, dripping wet and out of breath. The entrance hall went up 3 full stories, with a grand staircase in the middle. Half the steps were missing, making a broken path to the upper floors. Everything was stone and dust. No furniture, no pictures, just empty space, with doorways leading off in all directions. "What is this place?" Rafi asked quietly, his voice bouncing off the walls. Dom tried his phone again. "Still nothing," he said, then looked around with interest. "Old hunting chateau, maybe. 18th century from how the stones are cut." I shivered as my wet clothes stuck to my skin. "We need to get dry and warm up. Let's find somewhere to camp." We checked out the ground floor, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Most rooms were empty, with darker patches on the stone where furniture used to be. Water dripped from the ceiling in spots where the roof was leaking. Finally, we found what must have been the main hall, a huge room with a massive fireplace built into one wall. The ceiling wasn't leaking here, and the floor, though dusty, was dry. "This will work," I said, taking off my pack with relief. My back hurt from the hail hits, and I could tell bruises were forming. Dom walked around the space, checking out the fireplace. "Chimney looks clear. We could try a small fire if we find anything dry enough to burn." Rafi had gone quiet, standing in the middle of the room with a strange look on his face. When I asked if he was okay, he blinked like I'd woken him up. "Yeah, just... this place feels off." "It's an empty building in the middle of nowhere during a crazy hailstorm," Dom said with a tired smile. "Of course it feels off." We laid out our sleeping bags on the cold stone floor, staying away from any wet spots. Outside, the hail kept falling, hammering against the stone walls and what was left of the roof. The daylight was fading fast, making the empty windows turn into squares of deeper darkness. While I spread out my wet clothes hoping they'd dry, I noticed Raffi staring up at the high ceiling, looking troubled. "You really okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly, just wondering who lived here and why they left. Dom, always practical, was already digging through his pack for dry clothes. People leave places all the time. Keeping up a building this size would cost a fortune, probably got too expensive. "Maybe," Raffi said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. I looked around the big empty room, trying to picture it filled with people and light and life. Instead, all I saw were the dark corners growing darker as night came closer and the storm kept going. I tried to get comfortable on the hard stone floor, but sleep wouldn't come. The storm kept raging outside, hail pounding against the ancient walls like it was trying to break through. Our small fire cast long shadows across the hall, making the corners seem deeper and darker than they should have been. 2 hours had passed since we'd settled in. Dom was snoring lightly, his sleeping bag pulled up around his ears. Raffi kept shifting position, his eyes closed but his breathing too quick for actual sleep. That's when I heard it. A slow, rhythmic scraping sound from somewhere above us, like furniture being dragged across stone or something heavy being pulled along the floor. I listened, trying to place it. The noise continued steadily, pause, then drag, pause, then drag. I reached over and nudged Dom's shoulder. "Hey, you hear that?" He mumbled without opening his eyes. "So just the building, old places make weird noises." The scraping continued, moving across what must have been the ceiling of the second floor. Raffi suddenly sat up, eyes wide in the firelight. "There are people talking up there." Dom groaned and rolled over. "It's the wind, man." "No." Raffi shook his head firmly. "They're speaking, but I can't understand the words. It's not French or Spanish or anything I've ever heard before." I listened harder. Beyond the scraping, I couldn't make out voices, but Raffi looked genuinely spooked. "It sounds like someone talking underwater," he added, wrapping his arms around his knees. We all went quiet, listening. The scraping slowed, then stopped altogether. The only sounds were the storm outside and the occasional pop from our dying fire. "See?" Dom mumbled. "Just the building settling." I wasn't convinced, but I lay back down, staring up at the ceiling. My flashlight sat next to my sleeping bag, and I kept my hand near it. About an hour later, when Dom had fallen back asleep and Raffi was still sitting up staring into the darkness, the sounds started again. This time, they came from a different part of the chateau, not directly above us, but from what seemed like the east wing. The same slow drag, pause, drag, but now it sounded closer, more deliberate. I'd had enough. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and got to my feet. "Where are you going?" Raffi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To check it out. I'm not going to sleep with that noise anyway." "I'll come with you." I shook my head. "Stay here with Dom. I'll be right back." Raffi looked relieved and terrified at the same time. "Be careful." The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness as I made my way to the grand staircase. Most of the steps were still intact enough to climb, though I tested each one before putting my full weight on it. The wood creaked under my feet, each sound unnaturally loud in the silent building. When I reached the second floor, I paused to get my bearings. The upper hallway stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness beyond my light's reach. Doors lined both sides, some hanging off hinges, others missing entirely. Cold air flowed through the corridor, carrying the smell of mold and wet stone. I moved slowly, listening for the scraping sound. Nothing but silence now. The first room I checked was empty except for a broken chair and what might have once been a bed frame. The second room was similar, just bare walls and debris on the floor. In the third room, my light caught something strange on the floor. I stepped closer, crouching down to examine it. The stone floor had deep grooves worn into it, forming smooth curves that followed deliberate paths. They didn't look random or natural, not like water erosion or cracks from settling. They were too precise, too intentional, like some kind of pattern or symbol carved into the stone and then worn down by years of something. I traced one of the grooves with my finger. The stone felt cold and slightly damp. The groove was deep enough that my fingertip disappeared into it completely. I stood up and continued down the hall to the fourth room. The door was intact but stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, wincing at the loud creak of the hinges. What I saw inside made me stop breathing. Carved into the far wall were handprints, dozens of them, but not normal handprints. These had elongated fingers that ended in what looked like claw marks scoring the stone. They started at about head height and descended toward the floor in a diagonal line, as if something had been slowly sinking through solid stone while dragging its hands down. I moved closer, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as I examined them. The prints weren't just scratched into the surface. They were deeply carved, like the stone had been soft when the hands pressed into it. I reached out, hesitated, then placed my palm against one of the prints. My hand looked small in comparison, and my fingers barely reached halfway up the elongated digits. The scraping sound came again, directly above me. Something heavy dragged across the ceiling, right over my head. I backed away from the wall, nearly tripping over debris in my hurry to get out. My heart pounded as I moved quickly down the hallway toward the stairs, not bothering to check any more rooms. The scraping followed, moving parallel to my path but staying on the floor above. I took the stairs two at a time, careful not to miss my footing in the dark. When I reached the main hall, Raffi looked up expectantly, his face pale in the dying firelight. "Did you find anything?" he asked. Dom had woken up too, sitting up in his sleeping bag and rubbing his eyes. I looked at both of them, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're leaving at first light, as soon as the storm breaks." "What did you see up there?" Dom asked, suddenly alert. I considered telling them about the handprints, the grooves in the stone. But what would be the point? We couldn't leave until morning anyway, and they were already on edge. "This place isn't safe," I said instead. "The upper floors are more damaged than I thought. Parts of the ceiling could come down any minute." Dom looked skeptical but didn't argue. Raffi just nodded, like he'd known all along we shouldn't stay. "Try to get some sleep," I told them, settling back into my sleeping bag. "We'll head out as soon as there's enough light to see the trail." I kept my flashlight in my hand, switching it off to save the battery, but keeping my thumb on the button. Above us, the scraping had stopped again, but now I knew what was up there, or at least, what had left its mark. Sleep was impossible now. I lay there watching the shadows move across the ceiling, listening for any sound that didn't belong to the storm. The hail had finally stopped, replaced by steady rain that drummed against the stone. I wondered what would happen if the rain didn't stop by morning. Could we really stay another day in this place? The handprints flashed in my mind, those long fingers ending in claw marks. Something told me we needed to be gone before the next night fell, rain or no rain. For now, all we could do was wait for dawn and hope that whatever was moving around upstairs stayed there until we could leave. I woke with a jolt, my neck stiff from sleeping on stone. Pale gray light filtered through the chateau's empty windows, bringing with it the quiet aftermath of the storm. Everything looked washed out, dripping and saturated. The fire had died hours ago, leaving only cold ashes in the massive fireplace. My watch read 5:43 in the morning. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and immediately noticed Dom's empty sleeping bag. His backpack sat untouched where he'd left it, his jacket still hanging from a piece of broken furniture to dry. "Raffi," I said, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up." He groaned and rolled over, blinking at me. "What time is it?" "Almost 6. Dom's gone." That got his attention. He sat up quickly, looking around the room. Maybe he just went to take a leak. I shook my head. His headlamp's gone, but his pack and jacket are still here. Raffi pulled on his boots, hands trembling slightly. "How long has he been gone, do you think?" "No idea. I fell asleep eventually. I didn't mention what I'd seen upstairs last night, those handprints with the elongated fingers. It seemed cruel to add to his fear. We called Dom's name, our voices bouncing off the stone walls of the main hall. No answer came back except our own echoes. "Let's check the entrance hall," Raffi suggested, already moving toward the doorway. I followed, grabbing my flashlight. The entrance hall looked exactly as it had yesterday, grand staircase with missing steps, empty doorways, leading to other parts of the building. No sign of Dom. "I'll check this floor, you take the entrance hall and any rooms connected to it," I told Raffi. We split up, calling Dom's name every few minutes. I moved from room to room on the ground floor, my boots leaving tracks in the dust. The kitchen was a large space with a massive hearth and rusted metal hooks hanging from the ceiling. The pantry beside it had shelves covered in mouse droppings and old cobwebs. A dining room with tall windows. A smaller sitting room. No Dom. When I returned to the entrance hall, Raffi was waiting, looking worried. "Nothing. No sign anyone's been through here." "We need to check upstairs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Raffi glanced up the broken staircase. "You think he went up there? Maybe he heard something in the night like I did." We climbed carefully, testing each step before putting our weight on it. The stairs groaned under us, ancient wood protesting after centuries of neglect. The second floor was just as I remembered from my exploration last night. A long hallway with doors on both sides, some hanging open, others missing entirely. Cold, musty air filled the space. I led the way, flashlight sweeping the floor for any sign of Dom's passage. "What's that smell?" Raffi asked, wrinkling his nose. I'd noticed it too, something damp and slightly rotten, like wet leaves left too long in a pile. "Old buildings smell like this," I said, not believing it myself. We checked each room methodically, working our way down the hall. I deliberately left the room with the handprints for last, hoping we'd find Dom before then. In a narrow chamber at the end of the hall, my light caught something on the floor. Dom's headlamp, lying on its side. The light was still on, but the beam had faded to a sickly yellow glow, the battery nearly dead. Raffi rushed forward to pick it up. "Dom!" he called out, his voice cracking. I moved my flashlight to the wall beside where the headlamp had been. Fresh scratches marred the stone, 4 parallel lines repeated over and over, getting deeper and more frantic toward the floor. They looked like someone had taken a metal tool and repeatedly scored the wall, with more pressure as they went down. "What are these?" Raffi asked, touching one of the scratches. His finger came away with a fine dust. I shook my head, not wanting to speculate out loud. The scratches reminded me of the claw marks I'd seen last night at the ends of those strange handprints. Raffi suddenly started breathing too fast, backing away from the wall. "We need to leave right now," he said, the words coming out in gasps. "Right now, Caleb. We need to go." I grabbed his shoulders. "Raffi, breathe. Slow down." "You don't understand," he said, eyes wide. "This place, it's not right. Something took Dom. I can feel it." "We don't know that," I said, but my stomach twisted with fear. "He could be hurt somewhere. We can't leave without checking the whole building." Raffi squeezed his eyes shut, taking deep breaths. When he opened them again, he looked marginally calmer. "Okay, but quickly." We finished checking the second floor, including the room with the handprints. Raffi didn't comment on them, just stared with a blank expression that worried me more than his panic. The third floor was harder to access. Part of the connecting staircase had collapsed, leaving a gap we had to jump across. Once up there, we found the floor itself was unstable, with sections missing that showed straight through to rooms below. We checked what we could safely reach, calling Dom's name until our throats were raw. Nothing, no response, no further signs of him. We made our way back down to the main hall where we'd spent the night. Our packs sat where we'd left them, undisturbed. Dom's belongings still waited for his return. "What do we do?" Raffi asked, his voice small in the huge space. "Pack up," I decided. "We need to get help. There's got to be a town or a ranger station nearby." We packed our gear with shaking hands, working quickly and silently. I put Dom's most important items in my pack, figuring we'd hand them over to search and rescue. Taking his sleeping bag felt wrong, like admitting he wouldn't need it, so I left it rolled next to the dead fire. When we were ready, I moved to the front door, the same massive oak slab we'd entered through yesterday. I grabbed the iron handle and pulled. It didn't move. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it. The handle turned easily enough, and there was no lock engaged that I could see, but the door itself wouldn't budge an inch. "What's wrong?" Raffi asked, coming up behind me. "It's stuck or something." I set down my pack and tried again with both hands, bracing my foot against the wall for leverage. Nothing. The door stayed sealed as if it had been fused to its frame. Raffi tried next, then both of us together, pulling with all our strength. The door wouldn't even creak. "This doesn't make sense," I said, examining the edges. "There's no lock, nothing blocking it." Raffi touched the wood, running his fingers along the seam where door met frame. "It's like it's part of the wall now," he said quietly. I stepped back, looking at the massive door. He was right. The seam that had been clear yesterday now looked almost invisible, as if the wood and stone had grown together overnight. "There's another way out," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "This place has dozens of rooms. There must be a side entrance or windows low enough to climb through." Raffi nodded, but his eyes held a terrible knowledge. He'd sensed something wrong with this place from the moment we arrived, and now Dom was gone, and we couldn't open the door. I picked up my pack again, adjusting the straps. "Let's find another way out. Then we'll get help for Dom." As we moved back toward the interior doorways, I tried not to think about those scratches on the wall or how they got deeper toward the floor, like someone being dragged down while clawing desperately at the stone. I watched in silence as Raffi turned away from the sealed front door, his eyes darting around the entrance hall until they fixed on a fist-sized chunk of stone that had fallen from the wall. He snatched it up and ran to the nearest window. "Stand back," he warned, raising the stone above his head. I stepped aside as he brought it down with all his strength against the glass. The impact made a dull thud instead of the shattering crash we expected. Not even a crack appeared on the surface. "What the hell?" Raffi struck the window again, harder this time, his face contorted with effort. The stone bounced off harmlessly, nearly falling from his grip. I moved closer to examine the window. The glass looked normal enough. Grimy, centuries old, but ordinary window glass. When I touched it, though, I pulled my hand back immediately. It felt wrong. Too thick, slightly yielding under pressure, almost like it wasn't glass at all, but something organic. "Try this," I said, breaking the leg off a partially collapsed wooden chair nearby. The wood was old, but still solid, with a metal fitting at the end where it had connected to the seat. I swung it hard at another window. The chair leg rebounded, sending painful vibrations up my arm. I hit it again and again, each impact duller than it should have been. The glass remained unmarked. "It's not possible," I muttered, pressing my palm against the surface. It felt cool and slightly tacky, like a membrane rather than glass. "There are other ways out," Raffi said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "There have to be." We moved quickly through the chateau, checking every potential exit. The kitchen door that should have led to an herb garden or service yard was sealed just like the front entrance. Windows in the dining room, the pantry, the small sitting room, all impassable, all with that same strange, resilient quality. As we searched, I began to notice something else wrong. The layout of the building no longer matched what we'd explored yesterday. A hallway that I was certain had led to the kitchen now ended abruptly at a blank wall of solid stone. "Raffi!" I called, my voice echoing off the walls. "Wasn't there a passage here yesterday?" He came up beside me, staring at the wall. "Yes. We walked through here to find the kitchen." His hand touched the stone, fingers tracing the joints between blocks. This can't be right. We must be turned around. But we weren't. I knew this hallway. We'd passed through it multiple times since arriving. We continued our search, growing more disoriented with each discovery. A door I remembered opening to a small storage area now revealed a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. "Was this here before?" Rafi asked, peering down into the black void. I shook my head. No, it was just a closet with broken shelves. We backed away without exploring where those stairs might lead. The air inside the chateau had changed too. It felt thicker now, heavy with dust that made my throat raw. Each breath required more effort than it should have. The light filtering through the windows seemed dimmer, though my watch showed it was only mid-morning. After an hour of searching, we found ourselves back in the main hall. Every potential escape route had proven impossible, sealed, altered, or gone entirely. The chateau had become a maze with no exit. Rafi sank to his knees in the center of the hall, his body shaking. When I knelt beside him, I saw tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "The house is changing," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's changing around us. Can't you feel it?" I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that we were just confused, but I couldn't. The evidence was all around us. "It wants us here," Rafi continued, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "It took Dom, and now it's keeping us." "Buildings don't want things, Rafi." "This one does." He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed but suddenly clear. "You know it does. You felt it too." I couldn't argue. Since the moment we'd arrived, something had felt off about this place, not just abandoned or decayed, but wrong in a way that defied explanation. "We need to find Dom," I said, helping Rafi to his feet. "Then we'll figure out how to get out of here." He nodded, though neither of us had any idea where to look next. We'd searched every accessible room, called until our voices were hoarse. I scanned the main hall, looking for anything we might have missed. The massive fireplace where we'd built our small fire last night, the broken furniture pushed against walls, the high ceiling lost in shadow. My eyes caught on something that hadn't registered before, a tapestry hanging on the far wall. It was faded and worn, the image barely discernible, but it hung slightly crooked, its bottom edge lifted by what appeared to be a draft. I walked toward it slowly. As I got closer, I could feel a faint current of air coming from behind the fabric. Cool, damp air that smelled of wet earth and something else. Something metallic, like old coins or blood. "Rafi!" I called, keeping my voice low. "Come look at this." He joined me in front of the tapestry. Without saying anything, I pointed to the way it moved slightly, as if breathing. I reached out and pushed the heavy fabric aside. Behind it, a doorway opened into darkness. Stone steps descended steeply, disappearing into black. The draft grew stronger with the tapestry held back, bringing that smell with it. Wet soil and metal, ancient and unwholesome. "No," Rafi said immediately, backing away. "No way. We are not going down there." I let the tapestry fall back into place. We might not have a choice. Every other path leads nowhere. So we wait. Someone will come looking for us eventually. Who? We told no one exactly where we were hiking. The storm drove us off our planned route. Even if someone searches, they won't find this place easily. I hated saying it, but it was true. And Dom is somewhere in this building. What if he's down there? Rafi stared at the tapestry for a long moment. What if whatever took Dom is down there too? I had no answer for that. The scratches we'd found by his headlamp kept flashing in my mind, those 4 parallel lines scored into stone with increasing desperation. We stood in silence, both staring at the tapestry. The air from behind it seemed to grow colder, the metallic smell stronger. Whatever weighted down those stairs, I wasn't sure we were ready to face it. Not yet. "Let's keep looking," I said finally. "There might be something we missed upstairs. Maybe a window that's not sealed, or another way out through the roof." Rafi nodded, relief evident in his face. "Yeah, good idea." We turned away from the tapestry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd be back. The hidden stairway felt like it was pulling at me, a gravity I couldn't explain. Whatever secrets the chateau held, I was certain they lay down those ancient steps. For now, though, we'd keep searching above ground, keep looking for Dom, keep trying to find a way out. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that those stone steps would be waiting for us when we had nowhere else to turn. I stood in front of the tapestry, watching it move slightly with that cold draft from below. After discovering it at the end of our last search, we'd spent hours checking the upper floors again, searching every room we could safely reach, calling Dom's name until our throats hurt. We found nothing. No new signs of him. No way out of the chateau. Every window remained sealed, every door either locked or leading to places that made no sense. The day was fading. Light through the windows had taken on the golden quality of late afternoon, though it was hard to tell exactly what time it was inside these walls. My watch said 3:17, but it felt later. "We need to check what's down there," I said, nodding toward the tapestry. Raffi shook his head. "I know. He took a deep breath. "I'm scared, Caleb." "Me too. No point lying about it. But Dom might be down there. And honestly, we've tried everything else." He nodded, resignation replacing fear on his face. "Okay, but we stick together. No matter what." "No matter what," I agreed. I pushed the tapestry aside. The stairway looked even darker now, descending steeply into blackness. That smell washed over us, damp earth and something metallic that made my stomach turn. "I'll go first," I said, pulling my flashlight from my pocket. The steps were worn in the center, curved by centuries of use. I kept one hand on the wall as I went down, feeling the cold stone under my palm. Raffi followed close behind, his breathing quick and shallow. The staircase spiraled deeper than I expected. After what felt like 3 full rotations, it opened into a wide chamber. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing high stone walls and a vaulted ceiling supported by thick pillars. "What is this place?" Raffi whispered, his voice echoing slightly. I moved my light across the floor and felt my breath catch. The beam illuminated a series of rectangular depressions cut into the stone floor. Neat rows of them stretching across the chamber. "They look like..." Raffi started. "Graves," I finished for him. That's exactly what they looked like. Graves cut directly into the stone, sized for human bodies. I swept my light across the room, counting quickly. Dozens of them, maybe 40 or 50. We moved forward cautiously. Most of the recesses were filled with dust and small debris, clearly untouched for years. I knelt beside one, shining my light into it. The depression was about 6 feet long and shaped to accommodate a human form, wider at the shoulders, narrower at the feet. "Check these out," Raffi called softly from a few yards away. I joined him near the back wall. 3 of the recesses there were different, the dust in them disturbed and marked with dark stains that looked horribly like dried blood. "Something's been put in these," Raffi said, his voice shaking. "Recently." Before I could respond, my light caught something in the center row, a recess that looked wet, moisture gleaming as it reflected my flashlight beam. I approached it slowly, Raffi hanging back. Water, or some liquid, filled the depression about an inch deep, enough to create a perfect reflecting surface. But as I looked closer, I realized the shape was wrong. The recess wasn't cut like the others. The arm areas were too long, extending further than human proportions. The shoulder section was unnaturally narrow, while the head portion was wider, more oval than round. "That's not meant for a person," I said quietly. Raffi backed away. "Let's go, Caleb, please." I was about to agree when a sound came from the far corner of the chamber. A wet, slapping noise, like something damp and heavy being dragged across stone. I swung my flashlight toward it but caught only shadows between the stone pillars. Nothing visible. but the sound came again, closer now. Not footsteps, more like something pulling itself along the floor with terrible patience. "Oh God," Raffi breathed. The dragging sound quickened, accompanied now by a soft bubbling noise that might have been breathing. "Run," I said. Raffi bolted toward the stairs. I followed, taking one last look behind me. My light caught movement between two pillars, something pale and glistening, moving low to the ground. I didn't wait to see more. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my hand barely touching the wall for balance. Raffi was just ahead of me, his feet pounding on the stone steps. Behind us, the dragging sound changed, becoming faster, more urgent. Whatever was down there had picked up speed. At the top of the stairs, the tapestry had fallen back into place, blocking the doorway. Raffi hit it first, shoving against the heavy fabric. It gave way slowly, as if something was holding it from the other side. We pushed through together, bursting into the main hall. Light blinded me momentarily, golden afternoon sunlight streaming through the entrance hall. The front door stood wide open, showing wet grass and trees beyond. "The door!" Raffi shouted. "It's open!" We ran for it, not questioning this sudden change. I made it through first, stumbling onto grass that soaked my jeans instantly. The cool, outside air hit my face, sweet and clean after the Chateau's stale mustiness. I turned back, expecting to see Raffi right behind me. He wasn't there. The doorway was empty. "Raffi," I called, confused. He'd been right there, less than a step behind me. No answer came from the dark entrance. "Raffi!" I screamed his name, starting back toward the Chateau. The door slammed shut with a boom that echoed across the grounds. I reached it in seconds, grabbing the handle and pulling. It wouldn't budge, sealed again, just like before. "No, no, no," I pounded the wood with my fists. "Raffi!" Movement caught my eye, a figure visible through one of the ground floor windows. It stood perfectly still in the entrance hall, its outline familiar. It looked like Raffi. It had his build, his clothes. But as I watched, it turned its head toward me with a slowness that wasn't human, a mechanical, deliberate movement no living person would make. I backed away from the window, cold fear washing over me. The thing inside looked like my friend, but it wasn't moving like him. It wasn't him. As I stared, a terrible understanding dawned on me. The Chateau had let me go deliberately. It had opened its door just enough, just long enough for one of us to escape. Like a predator releasing a single prey animal to spread fear to the herd. Or worse, like it needed me out here for some purpose I couldn't yet comprehend. I pounded on the massive oak door with both fists, each impact sending pain up my arms. The wood felt harder than it should have, more like stone than timber. "Raffi!" I yelled, my voice breaking. "I'm coming back in. Hold on!" I grabbed the iron handle and pulled with everything I had, bracing one foot against the wall for leverage. The handle didn't even rattle in its housing. I backed up a few steps and threw my shoulder against the door, pain exploding across my collarbone as I bounced off the unyielding surface. The figure that looked like Raffi was still at the window watching me. It turned its head toward me with a slowness that made my skin crawl. Not the natural movement of a person looking at something, but the careful rotation of machinery. Its face was Raffi's, but all wrong. The eyes were too dark, too deep, like holes bored straight through his skull. I stumbled back, nearly falling on the wet grass. The thing wearing my friend's face pressed both hands against the glass. Its mouth opened and closed, trying to form words. I couldn't hear anything, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. "That's not him," I whispered to myself. "That's not Raffi." The creature's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, but it was too wide, showing too many teeth. It pressed harder against the window, the glass bowing outward impossibly, as if it might break at any moment. I grabbed my pack from where I'd dropped it and ran. The iron gate hung broken on its hinges as I crashed through it, not looking back until I reached the tree line. When I did turn, the figure was gone from the window. The Chateau stood silent, its walls darker than they should have been in the afternoon light. My legs carried me deeper into the forest, away from that place. I slid down muddy slopes, leaped over fallen logs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Branches whipped at my face, but I barely felt them. All I could think about was putting distance between myself and the chateau. Every few minutes I stopped to look back. Sure, I'd see them following. That thing wearing Rafi's face, maybe others like it. Maybe one wearing Dom's face too. But the forest behind me stayed empty except for trees and shadows. After what must have been an hour of running and stumbling, my legs gave out. I collapsed against a tree trunk, chest heaving. My clothes stuck to me, soaked with sweat and rain. Blood trickled from scratches on my hands and face. I tried to make sense of what had happened. The chateau had opened its door, letting me out while keeping Rafi inside. It was deliberate, like the building itself had made a choice, and that thing pretending to be Rafi. What was it? What had happened to my real friend? What had happened to Dom? I forced myself up and kept moving, not running now, but walking steadily. The thought of night falling with me still in this forest pushed me forward. I needed to find help, to get someone to go back for my friends. The trees thinned out gradually until I stumbled onto a narrow dirt road cutting through the forest. I had no idea which direction might lead to civilization, but the road had to go somewhere. I turned left and started walking. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I shoved them in my pockets, but that just made my whole body tremble instead. The road wound through the trees, curving around hills and dipping through small valleys. No cars passed, no houses appeared. 2 hours later, I sat on the roadside, completely spent. The sun hung low now, stretching shadows across the dirt. I'd have to find shelter soon. The thought of spending the night alone in these woods, so close to the chateau, made me sick with fear. The sound of an engine broke the silence. I looked up to see headlights approaching around a bend, the first sign of human life I'd encountered since escaping. An old Citroën rattled into view, its blue paint faded and chipped. It slowed as it approached, the driver peering at me through the windshield. He was an older man with a weathered face and gray hair beneath a flat cap. He stopped and rolled down his window. "Ça va, monsieur?" he asked, looking me over with concern. I stood up on shaky legs. "Help. I need help," I said, not sure if he understood English. My friends are missing." The farmer frowned, clearly struggling with my words. "Missing? Perdues?" "Yes, lost, trapped." I pointed back the way I'd come. "In a chateau, un chateau." He said something rapid in French that I couldn't follow, then reached across to open the passenger door. "Come, venez." I climbed in, my whole body aching as I settled into the seat. The car smelled of hay and tobacco. The farmer introduced himself as Marcel, then asked something else I didn't understand. "Saint-Afrique?" I asked, remembering the name of a nearby town from our hiking maps. "Police?" He nodded and put the car in gear. We bumped along the dirt road, eventually connecting to a paved one that wound through rolling hills. Marcel tried speaking to me a few times, but the language barrier made it impossible. I caught words like rain and accident, but not much else. The town appeared after about 40 minutes of driving. Stone buildings clustered around narrow streets, lights glowing warmly as dusk settled. Marcel drove straight to a small building with gendarmerie written above the door. Inside, a female officer looked up from her desk. Marcel spoke rapidly, gesturing toward me. I stood there, muddy and scratched, probably looking half crazy. "You are American?" the officer asked in accented but clear English. "Yes, my friends are missing, trapped." The words tumbled out. "We were hiking, got caught in a storm, found an old chateau. Now they're gone." She introduced herself as Officer Benoit and led me to a small room with a table and chairs. Marcel left after a brief exchange with her. "Please sit," she said. "Tell me slowly what happened." I tried to organize my thoughts. 3 of us were hiking, me, Dominic Walker, and Rafael Torres. 2 days ago, we got caught in a hailstorm. We found shelter in an old chateau in the forest. She wrote this down. "This chateau, you know its name?" "No. It was abandoned, falling apart." I pulled out my phone, relieved to see it still worked. "I have the GPS coordinates." She took them down, frowning slightly. "Continue, please." I told her about the first night, the strange sounds, about Dom disappearing, finding his headlamp upstairs with those scratches on the wall, about how the doors and windows wouldn't open, how the building seemed to change around us. Her expression grew more skeptical with each detail. When I got to the part about the basement with its grave-like recesses, she put down her pen. "Mr. Martinez," she said gently, "you have been through something traumatic, yes? Perhaps you hit your head during the storm?" "I know how it sounds," I said, leaning forward. "But my friends are still in there. Or something that looks like my friend is in there. It's not really him. His eyes were wrong. The way it moved." Officer Benoit sighed. "We will send someone to check these coordinates. Perhaps your friends found another way out and are looking for help, as you did." Another officer joined us, bringing coffee. They spoke in rapid French while I sipped the hot, bitter liquid. My hands still trembled, sloshing coffee onto the table. They asked for descriptions of Dom and Rafi, which I provided along with photos from my phone. They took down details about what they were wearing, their health conditions, any medications they might need. "Is there anything else you can tell us about this building?" Officer Benoit asked. "Landmarks nearby, the name of the closest village." I tried to remember details from our hike. We were heading toward Roquefort from La Couvertoirade. The storm blew us off course. The chateau was in a clearing with an iron fence around it. Part of the east tower had collapsed. The windows were all empty. No glass. Until I stopped, knowing how crazy it would sound to say the windows had somehow sealed themselves overnight. "Until what?" she prompted. "Until they weren't," I finished lamely. "Officer Benoit, I need to go back there with you. My friends. First, you need rest and medical attention," she said firmly. "Jean-Marc will take you to the hospital to check these cuts and make sure you are not injured. Tomorrow morning, we will send a team to these coordinates. But they could be. It is too dark now to search effectively." She cut me off. "The forest is dangerous at night, especially after rain. Slippery, many hidden drops. We go at first light." I wanted to argue, but knew she was right. I could barely stand, let alone lead a rescue mission. And what would I do if we found that thing that wasn't Rafi, or whatever had taken Dom? Officer Jean-Marc drove me to a small hospital where a doctor cleaned my scratches and checked me for concussion. They gave me a meal I barely tasted in a room for the night. As I lay in the narrow hospital bed, I couldn't stop seeing that thing at the window, my friend's face with those wrong eyes, that too wide smile. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it pressing against the glass, trying to get out, or trying to tell me something. I didn't sleep. How could I? Dom and Rafi were still in that place, or whatever was left of them was there. And tomorrow, I'd have to convince the police that everything I'd told them was true, even the parts that sounded impossible. Outside my window, the lights of Saint-Afrique glowed in the valley, so normal, so safe, while somewhere in the forest, that chateau waited with its sealed doors and wrong-faced inhabitants and wet recesses carved for bodies that weren't human. I returned to the chateau exactly 1 week after my escape. The small convoy of vehicles bumped along the dirt road, headlights cutting through the morning mist. Officer Benoit drove the lead vehicle with me in the passenger seat, her face set in professional neutrality. Behind us followed a second police car and two civilian vehicles carrying the volunteers from the local hiking club and Henri, the paramedic. The week between had passed in a blur of frustration and mounting dread. First came the disbelief. The local authorities had sent 2 officers the morning after my rescue, but they returned claiming they'd found nothing at the coordinates I provided. No chateau, no sign of my friends. I'd nearly lost my mind, demanding to be taken there immediately, but a doctor at the hospital insisted I stay for observation. 3 days of bureaucratic hell followed. Phone calls to the American embassy. Forms filed in triplicate. Missing persons reports for Dom and Rafi. More questioning, the same details repeated until my voice grew hoarse. With each retelling, I saw the subtle shift in the officer's expressions, from concern to doubt to thinly veiled skepticism. "You're sure about these coordinates?" Officer Benoit asked now, glancing at her GPS as we approached the turnoff. "Positive," I said. I'd checked them 20 times against our original hiking map. "The chateau should be about half a kilometer through those trees." She nodded, turning onto a barely visible path that cut through the underbrush. The vehicle lurched and swayed on the uneven ground. Behind us, the others followed, their headlights bouncing wildly through the trees. The path widened into the clearing I remembered. My heart pounded as we pulled to a stop. The rusted iron fence was there, exactly as I recalled, the gate still hanging broken on its hinges. But beyond it... "No," I whispered, fumbling with my seatbelt. "No, that's not right." I shoved the car door open and stumbled out. Where the massive stone chateau had stood just 7 days ago, there was nothing but a sprawling pile of rubble. Ancient, weathered stones lay scattered across the clearing, half buried in earth. Moss and lichen covered most surfaces. Young saplings had pushed up between collapsed walls. "This is..." Officer Benoit began, coming to stand beside me. "Wrong," I finished. "This is wrong. It was standing. The whole building was standing a week ago." The other vehicles parked behind us. The search team climbed out, murmuring to each other in French as they surveyed the ruins. One of the volunteers, an older man named Claude who spoke some English, approached us. "This chateau," he said, gesturing to the rubble, "has been like this for many years. 20, 30 years at least." I shook my head. "No, we stayed here. The front door was right there." I pointed to a partially standing section of wall with an arch. "That was the entrance hall. The main hall was through there, with a huge fireplace." Officer Benoit exchanged a look with her colleague. "Monsieur Martinez, are you certain this is the correct location?" "Check the GPS," I said, my voice rising. "These are the exact coordinates I gave you. This is where we stayed. This is where..." I trailed off, staring at the ruins. Henri, the paramedic, touched my arm gently. "Sometimes, after trauma, our minds can..." I jerked away from him. "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." Officer Benoit raised her hands in a calming gesture. "No one is saying you are crazy. We will search the area. If your friends were here, we will find some evidence." The team spread out, approaching the ruins cautiously. I followed Officer Benoit toward what had been the entrance. My eyes kept trying to superimpose the chateau I remembered over the rubble before me. The grand staircase, the high ceiling, the many doorways leading deeper into the building. "The main hall was this way," I said, climbing carefully over fallen stones. We reached a relatively clear area that might have once been a large room. One of the volunteers called out, pointing to something half buried under a section of collapsed roof. Officer Benoit and I hurried over. The man brushed away debris to reveal a corner of fabric. Carefully, the team pulled aside more rubble until they had uncovered 3 sleeping bags laid out in a rough triangle. "These are yours?" Officer Benoit asked. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Mine, Dom's, and Rafi's. We laid them out like this in the main hall." I pointed to each one. "That one's mine. The green one is Dom's. The blue one is Rafi's." The officer's expression changed subtly. This was the first physical evidence supporting my story. She directed the team to search more thoroughly, and within minutes, they had uncovered 2 backpacks partially buried under stone. I identified them immediately. Dom's and Rafi's. Mine is... I had mine with me when I escaped. Officer Benoit examined the packs without touching them, then photographed everything in place. "These items do not look like they have been here for decades," she said quietly. "Yet the building..." I knelt beside Dom's pack, fighting the urge to open it. It looked exactly as it had a week ago, relatively clean and undamaged, despite being under rubble. The same was true of the sleeping bags. They should have been rotted, moldy, destroyed by years of exposure. Instead, they looked like they'd been placed there days ago. "The basement," I said suddenly, standing up. There was a staircase behind a tapestry in the main hall. It led down to a room with... I hesitated, not wanting to describe the grave-like recesses. "We need to find that staircase." The search team spent the next hour carefully moving stones, searching for any opening or passage leading downward. They found nothing but solid earth and more rubble, no staircase, no basement. "Perhaps it collapsed," suggested Claude. "Old Chateau. They often had extensive cellars." I knew he was trying to be helpful, but I shook my head. "We were down there the day I escaped. Rafi and I. There was a chamber with stone pillars." Officer Benoit made notes but said nothing. I could see doubt creeping back into her expression. By mid-afternoon, they had searched most of the ruins. The second officer suggested expanding the search to the surrounding forest. "If your friends left this place, they would have gone through these trees," he said in broken English. We formed a line and began moving through the forest in a standard search pattern. I found myself between Claude and a young woman from the hiking club who kept giving me worried glances. After 20 minutes of searching, one of the volunteers shouted from the western edge of the clearing. We all converged on his position. He pointed to the ground where clear footprints were visible in what had once been mud, now dried into hard impressions. Officer Benoit crouched to examine them. "2 sets going in," she said, pointing to tracks that led toward the ruins. "1 set coming out." She looked up at me. "Yours?" I nodded, remembering my panicked flight from the chateau. They decided to follow the outgoing tracks, my tracks, to see where they led. The footprints matched my frantic path through the forest, veering around trees and over fallen logs. After about 50 meters, Claude, who was leading this portion of the search, stopped abruptly. "C'est bizarre," he said, pointing at the ground. The tracks simply ended. 1 clear footprint, then nothing, as if I had vanished mid-step. The ground beyond showed no signs of disturbance at all. "This is impossible," Officer Benoit said, looking back along the trail of prints. I remembered running blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face. I remembered stopping to look back, expecting to see that thing with Rafi's face pursuing me. I remembered continuing on until I found the road where Marcel picked me up. "I kept going," I said. "I ran for at least an hour before I reached the road." The officer frowned. "Then where are the rest of your tracks?" I had no answer. The search continued until dusk, then resumed at first light the next day. For 3 more days, teams combed the forest in expanding circles from the ruined chateau. They brought in dogs on the second day, offering them Dom's and Rafi's clothing from their packs to catch a scent. The animals whined and paced, but found nothing. On the final day, as we gathered by the vehicles preparing to leave, Officer Benoit approached me with a clipboard. "The case remains open," she said. "We will continue to investigate the disappearance of Dominic Walker and Rafael Torres." She hesitated, then added, "But I must be honest with you, Monsieur Martinez. Without more evidence?" I nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. They'd found no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just 3 sleeping bags and 2 backpacks in the ruins of a building that had apparently been collapsed for decades. despite my insistence that we'd slept inside its intact walls just 1 week earlier. "You believe me, though," I said. It wasn't a question. Officer Benoit was silent for a moment. "I believe you experienced something traumatic. I believe your friends are missing. Beyond that," she shrugged, "there are many things in these old forests that cannot be easily explained." That was as close to validation as I would get. I flew back to the States 3 days later. Dom's parents had arrived in France by then, and Rafi's were on their way. I couldn't face them. What could I say? That their sons had been taken by a building that no longer existed? That the last time I saw Rafi, it wasn't really him at all, but something wearing his face like a mask? Back home, I tried to resume my life. I went through the motions, returned to work, answered concerned calls from friends, even started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. But at night, I dream. The dreams are always the same. I'm back in that basement chamber, standing over the wet recess carved into the stone floor. The liquid inside is perfectly still, creating a mirror surface. I lean over to look at my reflection, but it's not my face I see. It's Dom's. Then it's Rafi's. Then it's something else entirely. Something with eyes too dark and a mouth too wide. Something that reaches up with elongated fingers to pull me down into the cold, waiting darkness.